Today we take the first step in the long path of justice for the murder of a 12-year-old child, Maxwell Max Schollenberger. The Lebanon County Detective Bureau charged Scott Schollenberger, the child's biological father, and Kimberly Maurer, the child's acting mother, identically. Each defendant faces one count of criminal homicide, one count of endangering the welfare of a child, and conspiring with one another to commit these heinous acts. Put simply, these two defendants are charged with starving, neglecting, abusing, and killing their own son. Both defendants were arrested Friday and taken into custody. They were immediately incarcerated. They will be held without bail due to the nature of their charges. On May 26th of this year, the Annville Township Police Department responded to the victim's home. When they arrived, they found this little boy's body, Max Schollenberger, deceased in his bed, covered in his own human waste. They requested assistance from the Office of the District Attorney and the Lebanon County Detective Bureau. Our detectives responded, and they found Maxwell Schollenberger, age 12, deceased in his own bed. He was fully naked. His body was covered in his own human waste. This little boy, in his bedroom, he had not one toy, no furniture aside from the bed where he died. This little boy had nothing other than the bed. The bed itself was soaked, was covered in fecal matter and the child's human waste. When detectives lifted the mattress, looked under the frame, they found piles of moldy feces. The floor surrounding the bed was covered in fecal matter. The bedroom itself contained no bathroom, contained no area for this little boy to relieve himself, other than the bed where he died. This child could not escape that bedroom. When our detectives examined the door, they found exterior eyelet hooks on the outside frame, locks, latches. When they went on the inside of the bedroom had windows, but they were entirely restricted. Those windows had louvered shutters screwed into the window frames themselves. The blinds, the curtains were duct taped to the window. That little boy in his suffering could not see out. The community, even if it knew to look for him, could not see in. And that child died, suffering entirely alone in the darkness. When our detectives looked at that little boy's body, they realized Max Schollenberger was severely underweight and malnourished, and we requested an autopsy. Dr. Michael Johnson performed the little boy's autopsy. He examined his tiny body. He found atrophied limbs containing little to no muscle mass. He found weakened bones consistent with starvation and malnutrition. He found evidence of ongoing, constant, and consistent neglect. And throughout that little boy's body, he found hemorrhaging and internal bleeding. In his final opinion, Dr. Johnson stated, Max Schollenberger, age 12, died of blunt force trauma, complicating starvation and malnutrition. The manner of death in this case is criminal homicide. Now, our detectives also investigated the little boy's life as well as his death. And they learned the truly deplorable conditions that were rendered to him by his caregivers, our defendants. They learned Scott Schollenberger is in fact the biological father. Kimberly Maurer, she was engaged to Scott Schollenberger. They were in a romantic relationship for a number of years. They lived together with our victim, Max Schollenberger. And Kimberly Maurer acted as a caregiver, acted in lieu of a mother. Both defendants acknowledged their ongoing responsibility for care, that this child, this little boy, was their responsibility. Despite that, Max Schollenberger was never enrolled in school. He was 12 years old when he was killed. The defendants had not taken that child to the doctor, had not gotten any medical care in over a decade. And both defendants acknowledged the eyelet hooks were placed on the outside of that bedroom door. Those locks were installed for the purpose of locking that small child inside. Now, our detectives also investigated the nature of the household, and what we found was that these two defendants have biological children together. Those children reside in the same home where Max Schollenberger was abused, was neglected, and where he died. And those children, their children together, all appeared happy, healthy, and well cared for. Those children go to the doctor, and those children went to school. We interviewed the other children in the home. They would describe the foul stench that emanated from Max Schollenberger's bedroom, how they were told to ignore him and to not talk to him. One child described when our defendants would enter that little boy's bedroom, that child would scream and he would cry. They described the parents discussing with one another the bruises they saw on that little boy's body when they went into his room. When we examined the household, every other room was normal. There was an abundance of food in the kitchen and in all of the cabinets. And that food clearly went to feed every other person inside that household besides Max Schollenberger. In summation, the only child who suffered, who starved, who spent the entirety of his life covered in his own human waste was our little boy, our murdered victim, Max Schollenberger. Cases which involve children are the most haunting for our community, but also for our investigators. Max Schollenberger existed. I will not call this living, and I never will. He existed in a state of perpetual suffering. He existed in the most deplorable, the foulest, the most heinous of human conditions. He remained starved, isolated, and locked away until the moment of his death. Max Schollenberger never got to experience the excitement of a first day of school. He didn't get to blow out candles on his favorite birthday cake. This tiny 12-year-old boy never knew the unconditional warm love of a family. The sheer despair, the sheer suffering that was Max Schollenberger's life now demands justice for his death. And that is exactly what we intend to do with these charges. If you have questions, we'll briefly answer those at this time. So the motive is often one that law enforcement speculates about. At this stage in the investigation, we can't sit here and comment on speculation. That's certainly something that at trial we will discuss, we will argue, we will prove. But at this point, we can't comment on that.
Who reported him dead, and do we know how long he was deceased for? I know he was found in May, but how long has he been dead for?
Chief, in terms of who reported the child, it came from inside the house, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, when law enforcement responded, decomp was underway. However, it didn't appear as though the body had been there for a substantial period of time by any means. Any other questions? Yes, Laura.
Do we know where the biological mother is?
Biological mother is in contact with law enforcement. In terms of custody, it was Scott Schollenberger, biofather, the defendant in this case, who had live-in full-time custody. It doesn't appear at this point that biological mother was in contact or any type of communication with this little boy for quite some time.
And what are the ages of the biological children that Schollenberger and Bauer had?
They are all very young. I want to say under 5. And there are 3, correct?
Correct.
3.
Did they ever see him, or they were never allowed in the room?
Conditions within the house worsened over the years. The other children certainly knew that Maxwell Schollenberger existed. They were aware that he was in the house. As time went on and the situation worsened, the child became more and more restricted and less visible to other members of the household until by the time of his death was in that room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The call at Maggie's that came from within the household,
Yes.
was that one of the other children then?
No. It would have come from one of the other... I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, from a neighbor.
And a little bit of the timeline clarity, this was in May.
Yes,
Charges were filed on
on Friday.
when
in the past few months, what we've been doing is frankly our job. We're doing our investigation to make sure it's as thorough and locked in as it can possibly be. Children and Youth was involved with the family to make sure that the other children were safe, that they were cared for. That happened from the onset of the investigation. However, forensic things such as autopsies, they take time. Doctors need additional consultations, that takes time. We wanted to make sure the children were interviewed. We wanted to make sure every possible person that we could find that we knew of was interviewed. And that's what we've been doing for the last few months. As of Friday, to the best of our knowledge, Scott Schollenberger had not been living in the residence where the child died. We had to look for him. He was located in Philadelphia. He was taken into custody without incident and was immediately returned to Lebanon County. Both defendants were arraigned by John Ditzler and were given no bail in light of the nature of the charges. Whoever.
So, just medical research, is there any way to say like a timeline of how long this child was suffering?
We will have experts who will testify at trial to discuss things of that nature. There's no way to say it was 2 years in 1 day, 6 months in 2 weeks, nothing like that, nothing so mathematically definitive. What they can say is that given the condition of the limbs, the lack of muscle, the lack of ability to bear weight, things like that, this wasn't a quick occurrence by any means. It takes quite some time to put a child into a condition, a state that existed at the time of death.
You said people really couldn't see into this room. It was completely closed off. Did neighbors get an idea by the smell? How did they have any indication something was off? And also, was there any reports to children and youth services with suspicions or any red flags before this point?
So in terms of the condition of the house, the windows to the child's bedroom, there were multiple. One window was directly above the headboard. It had shutters that were screwed into the window's frame so that there was no ability to open them, move them, etc. Another window had blinds and curtains that our law enforcement, when they examined them, they were actually duct taped over. So from the outside street vantage point looking in, there's nothing you're able to see other than the actual window coverings and the window treatments. When our police were inside and it was daylight, there really wasn't any light that was visible coming through other than through the slats of the blinds themselves and the tiny visibilities between the louver doors and the shutters. That was the only light that would come inside of that room. It was frankly quite dark. In terms of what prompted the neighbor to call Detective Hirsch,
Kimberly Mauer had gone to the neighbor, and the neighbor made the phone call.
so it was Defendant Mauer, the woman who acted as the mother. She had spoken with the neighbor then made the phone call. That's as much at this point as we're willing to say.
Is the home a single-family home or a duplex or a row home type thing?
I would consider it a single-family home. Yes, single-family home, backyard, etc.
So the parents were feeding him in over the years. What kind of attention was he getting?
There was food that was taken at various points in time to the room. What the autopsy revealed is that the body was at such a point at the time of death where the child really couldn't process food. It had been going on for that period of time. There was a calcification in the stomach. There were issues with the intestines. The little boy was just unable to process whatever would have been given to him. There was a pile of food found hidden under the bed inside the room itself, but there's no indication that there was a set schedule or anything like that. What the other children related to us is that this little boy, Max Schollenberger, was given the table scraps of whatever the other children didn't eat. That's what they took upstairs for him.
You use the words deplorable and heinous, but from your perspective, how would you compare this to any other case that you guys have dealt with like this?
So in terms of my career as a prosecutor, I'm in my 11th year here with the Office of the District Attorney. This, to me, is one of the worst, if not the worst, that I have ever seen. The condition of the bed, the condition of the sheets, the condition of the room, the condition of the body itself, covered in human waste, covered in fecal matter. What you'll note in the press release, in the sheets themselves around the little boy's body, there were claw marks through the feces. You could see claw marks coming down through on the sheets themselves. To have a 12-year-old child, a gift to this world, left in that condition, treated in that manner for such a substantial period of time, it's one of the worst, if not the worst, I've ever seen.
Were there any neighbor suspicion before this?
We had had no ongoing calls at that residence. There had been nothing really put out to Annville Township Police Department, really nothing. Now, they had lived in that home for a few years prior to another residence, but they had been there for a number of years at the time of death. That's not something at this point that we're going to comment on, but there would have been nothing to necessarily trigger a children and youth investigation or anything like that.
Does the heinousness of this crime rise to the level of special circumstances, rise to the level of perhaps, something beyond imprisonment such as capital case?
We do not have the aggravating factors, unfortunately, in this case for it to be death penalty, so we are approaching this as a criminal homicide without death penalty being on the table.
This might be a technical thing, but blunt force trauma, to a layperson like me, that sounds like hitting, that kind of thing. Is that what this was?
I don't want to put medical terms into our pathologists or into the other doctors that involve, but with blunt force trauma, what you can think of is a forceful contact of some nature between the body and another surface. Blunt force trauma can be a car accident. Blunt force trauma can be, unfortunately, you trip and violently fall down the stairs. Blunt force trauma can be an assault, a wound, something like that. So the blunt force trauma simply means there was a violent impact with the child's body and another surface, which then caused internal injuries.
Is there evidence that he was beaten too then?
There is internal bleeding and hemorrhaging throughout the body at this point, as early on as we are in the investigation. That's as much as we're going to say.
So exactly how he got that blunt force trauma, yes, you wrote.
Correct.
Are these two being represented by the public defender?
At this point, I'm unsure if anyone has retained counsel on this matter. Scott Schollenberger was out on bail at the time he committed this offense.
Is it fortunate that they were called?
I'm sorry?
Is it fortunate that they were called?
Fortunate? At some point, this community needed to seek justice for this little boy. We missed the opportunity to do it during his life. That, to me, is the greatest tragedy of this entire case, is that this neighbor called, this came to light now, after the time of death and not before. So is it fortunate that we're now involved, that we're able to stay here and actually say this child's name, probably for the first time in the last decade? Yes. Do I think what this little boy suffered leading up to his death and what that life was like was horrible? Absolutely. But would I describe it necessarily as fortunate? I don't know that I would use that term. Anything else? Okay. Well, I thank you all very much. If you
Investigators describing a horrible scene in Annville that's left the community in shock. A 12-year-old boy weighing less than 50 pounds found dead inside a bedroom outfitted like a dungeon. CBS 21's Brian Sheehan is live outside that home tonight with who the district says is responsible, and we have to warn you, some of these details are very disturbing.
Yeah, Joel, they certainly are. I want to go ahead and show you the scene right here. Take a look at this second floor window and the white shutters inside. That's where investigators believe that 12-year-old boy's father and his fiance locked him out of sight in deplorable conditions for several years.
To have a 12-year-old child, a gift to this world, left in that condition, treated in that manner for such a substantial period of time, it's one of the worst, if not the worst, I've ever seen.
Lebanon County District Attorney Pierre Hescroft describing the horrific scene investigators found inside this bedroom on South White Oak Street in Annville Township, Lebanon County in late May.
The condition of the bed, the condition of the sheets, the condition of the room, the condition of the body itself, covered in human waste, covered in fecal matter.
That body belonging to 12-year-old Maxwell Schollenberger. The DA's office announcing charges against his biological father, 42-year-old Scott Schollenberger, and his fiancée, 35-year-old Kimberly Maurer.
People yelled at you, I put no trespassing signs.
Nicholas Rivera lives just 3 doors down.
It's sick. It makes no sense how can somebody do it to their kids. I have 5 kids of my own, and I will never do something like that.
The DA says the investigation revealed the couple's biological children living in the home were healthy and well cared for.
The other children related to us is that this little boy, Max Schollenberger, was given table scraps of whatever the other children didn't eat. That's what they took upstairs for.
The DA says Max was never registered for or attended school and hadn't received medical care since he was 2. Some that were close to the family reportedly told investigators they were unaware of his existence.
I've been here for 3 years. I have neighbors that have been here for 10 years. They never even seen this kid.
A forensic autopsy conducted at Lehigh Valley Hospital found Maxwell was likely starved and malnourished. and died of blunt force trauma to the head.
At some point, this community needed to seek justice for this little boy. We missed the opportunity to do it during his life. That, to me, is the greatest tragedy of this entire case.
Now, the district attorney says there wasn't a prior or current CYS investigation. Both individuals are locked up tonight without bail. Reporting live in Annville, Lebanon County, I'm Brian Sheehan, CBS 21 News.